Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the Tower card. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon. Supporting me there gives you early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, and monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners. The link will be in the show notes to check that out. You can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards that I pull each episode. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup groups events where we all bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. Maybe you'll even find a deck that you really like and can search for that particular one in the future to use at home. All right, so welcome to our main discussion, and welcome to Season 3 of the podcast. We're a couple episodes in now to Season 3. But just a reminder, in the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. So if you haven't listened to those, go check those out. In Season 2, I went through the first 13 cards of the Major Arcana, one per episode. And now we're into Season 3, where I'm going through the final 9 cards in the Major Arcana, and then talking about each suit. And today, as I said, I'm talking about the Tower card. So the Tower card in the Major Arcana, the number associated with it is 16. The numerology for 16 are wisdom, intuition, life lessons, analytical, what else? Yeah, I guess like introspection, independence, driven to understand the unseen world, being a seeker, intuitive, and sensitive. So, common depictions of the Tower card are often a literal tower. Sometimes it looks like the Tower of Babel from the Christian Bible, with people kind of like falling or jumping out of it. Sometimes there's a lightning strike involved, sometimes along with the depiction of a tower, or sometimes isolated. I know in one of my decks it shows a tree that's being struck by lightning for the Tower card. Sometimes there's like fireballs in the air, or just different things sort of related to like this change, destruction. And in the 3 cards that I'm going to show today, they all have a little bit of a different depiction of the tower, which I like. All right, so in the Ophidia Rosa Tarot deck by Leela and Olive, this one the deck is mostly flowers. It's sort of muted. It's very just like, looks like sort of hand drawn in pen, and then it has filled in with some colors. So on this one, there's like a sword going like pointed down, and it's broken, and it almost kind of looks like a tower. And then there's like a flower in the middle of the card, and also sort of transposed over top of the sword, and then it almost looks like there's like petals shooting out from it. Again, in the same way that's often depicted in the Tower card, where there's like fireballs, or again, that sort of like lightning strike, like movement is depicted, and then there's sort of like lines coming out from the flower, again, as if like the petals are shooting outward. In the Therapist Who Tarot deck, which is done in watercolor, this card in particular is sort of abstract, I would say. It almost looks like if when you like put your finger in ink and make a fingerprint, that's kind of like what it looks like, except for it would have been like sort of in red ink. So it's kind of like a bunch of circles, and then there's kind of, again, it's done in watercolor. So if you think about how watercolor is done, You sort of have like the color of the ink that you're picking up, and then you have water. So there's sort of like smears or blurs on it, and then there's also, it's mostly red or pinkish, and then there's also some like dark, like black or another color that's sort of like in the middle of the circles. It's not symmetrical really, it's just sort of like pushed in there in the middle. And it does kind of give the same energy as the Fide Rosa card, where there's sort of like, it looks like something's moving or something's sort of like exploding or imploding. Like there's some sort of movement evident in the card, even though it's mostly just like circles. Um, in the same way that kind of like, again, a fingerprint would be. And on this card, there's a word under each of the titles of the card, and that word on this one is ruin. And then on the back of the card, there are questions in this deck, and it says, who or what brings out the worst in you? What is your relationship with stress? And in what area of your life should you slow down? So this sort of gives you an indication already of what this card is about. Um, and in the last card I'm going to talk about today is the Anima Mundi Tarot deck. And in this depiction, the tower is depicted as Mount St. Helens. And it looks like it's actively erupting in this picture. It's like mostly just looks like a mountain. And then it has a bunch of like gray smoke coming out of the top of it. Other than that, it looks kind of serene, like there's stars in the background of the sky. There's like some trees depicted in the front of the mountain, almost as if you're standing on a mountain, like across from it. And I wouldn't necessarily know that it's Mount St. Helens, except for that it says it in the deck book, and I remember, because also I live in Washington State, where Mount St. Helens is, and it's very ingrained in people that live here. The history of Mount St. Helens and it exploding in the 80s, and kind of the ash and destruction that went everywhere in this area, and actually all over the world. The ash went all over the world, which is kind of wild. So yeah, those are sort of like the depictions that I have in these cards. Other symbols that are often seen on the tower card, like I said, a lightning bolt. It's often like the tower might be on fire. There's sometimes flames that shoot out from the windows, or there's like people that look like they're jumping from the tower. Um, yeah, it's sort of like showing like, right, the tower's maybe going to collapse, or like something's happening to it and people are trying to get out. Sometimes there's like other things shown in the air, like bricks or stones or water droplets, again, like fireballs, like different things like that. Again, so there's a lot of like action often depicted in the card, of like things are actively happening, right? You see people midair and that kind of thing. It says that so I'm reading in the Library of Esoterica, Tarot book by Taschen. They also talk about that sometimes the tower depicted has a door and sometimes it does not. So sometimes it looks like there's literally no way to get out of the tower, right? Which is maybe why people in the car are jumping out of the top of it. Um, and then it says it often shows a rocky mountaintop stands beyond it, as if the natural world is indifferent to the explosive scene below. So that is sort of indicated in the Anima Mundi card. We don't really see the mountain, but we see sort of, it's almost like the perspective that you're standing on a mountain looking across the way at Mount St. Helens, and there's like sort of trees that are close to you in your perspective. Um, all right, so let's get into meanings for this card. So you're probably getting a vibe already. And again, maybe if you listen to my tarot and pop culture episode, you're aware that the Tower card is also often seen as a big scary card. And if people pull it, it's often depicted as like destruction, something's happening in your life, right? It might be literally like old structures are falling away, right? Like your tower is collapsing, whatever the tower sort of metaphorically means for you. It talks about the shattered stone of the tower's walls are a symbol of sudden change. And again, I'm reading this from the Toshin book. Right, momentous radical shifts, transformation, right, like a literal shaking loose of foundation, or things like that. Again, like thinking of Mount St. Helens, like the top of the mountain literally like blew off. So you have, again, kind of all those pieces in the air and sort of like you don't really know where they're going to go. Um, Whatever the old way was is no longer possible, right? Again, if you think about like things aren't going to go back to how they were if the tower literally destructs or falls apart, or again, thinking of the natural world of Mount St. Helens, like once that large part of the mountain is blown off, that happened in the 80s. So you go there today in 2025, and there's still a lot of evidence of what happened then. Um, there's still a lot of dead trees around. There's a lot of like plants and stuff that have grown back, but it just killed so much stuff at the time that even now when you go there, it still is it's sort of forever changed, or at least forever in the human lifespan changed. I'm sure in, a couple 100,000 years it might look a little different. But again, right, this is like our human view on the situation. So maybe that's also why we think of literal towers that we build, because again, those are often depicted on a more human timeline. Um, so again, sort of like meanings of this card, right? Like again, if you think about a tower with no door on the bottom, there's no escape, right? Like, which is pretty scary, right? Again, I sort of get why it gets depicted as a scary card, right? Like something is breaking down and it's sort of forcing you to make things new again. The top of the page in this Toshin book for this card says the liberation of destruction. It says in the tarot, the tower represents the clearing away of negativity to make way for the spiritual ascension. And so you just have, and this is a partial quote by Robert M. Place, talking about this card. It's the purification that paves the way to the star, which is the next card in the Major Arcana. So I'll be talking about that one next episode. But yeah, like this card is sort of about chaos and disruption, right? Like again, if you think of a bolt of lightning, like hitting a tree or hitting something, it often like cracks the tree, right? Like it changes that tree forever, and that kind of thing. So it's just, and sometimes metaphorically, this can be more about like the illusion has to be shattered, right? Maybe you thought something was going to go this one way, and now you have a different light on it, or you realize that there was a lie in there. It talks about worlds crashing down and yet rising again. Um, Again, this feels very apt for, I would say, our current world and politics and moment. It does feel like a lot of things are crashing down around us in very unpleasant to deal with ways. But sometimes I think things have to crash down in order for us to rebuild sort of things in the way that we want, things that maybe in a better way. So, sort of violent shifts, right? And just thinking about like, yeah, it's challenging. It's a challenging um, card at times, but also it's sort of again kind of force us to catapult us forward into change. Um, so I'm going to look in some of the other books I have as well for some of their interpretations of this card. I have the book Tarot for Change by Jessica Dorr. She talks about the tower being like thinking about it in terms of anxiety. I thought was interesting. And she really goes on to talk about how that when the tower falls, it might be when we realize that anxiety in it of itself is not dangerous. The danger comes from the intricate ways we attempt to outrun and escape it. The patterns of avoidance are what create problems for us beyond the natural pain of living. But also, there are better and more life giving ways to cope with stress than building patterns that act like the cement walls, right, of the tower. when we come to understand that, yes, maybe our psychological defense structures have served, right, have been protecting us, it doesn't mean that we actually need that kind of protection now. And again, she's sort of really talking about that, um, like attachment and the anxiety when you're a child, right? If someone leaves, if your parent or caregiver leaves a room, um, like having secure attachment means that they come back. You know that they're going to come back and that they're going to care for you. They're not leaving you all alone. And that a lot of our anxiety, even in adulthood, is still sort of like replicating that experience of like fear of, okay, what if I'm going to be left alone? What if I'm going to, what if I'm not doing the right things and they're going to be unhappy with me and that kind of thing. So she's really talking about like, okay, like, is that still true anymore, right? Like, are there, right, our anxiety is maybe protecting us from being abandoned as a child, which, right, usually means death or like it's going to be very challenging, especially for a baby to survive without a caregiver present. And so a lot of that sort of makes sense in that context. But then maybe when we get older, we get to adulthood, right? Maybe that anxiety isn't really serving us anymore. And sometimes we maybe built up the walls, right, of our metaphorical tower in a time when we weren't supported or we, right, there was a lot of like threat to our lives or to like our daily needs. But in reality, right, where we are today, right, maybe we have more support, we have people that love and care for us, we have more stability that we've created and loving relationships. And so in reality, we can tolerate and like learn from, right, our anxiety. We don't have to kind of follow those thoughts where they go. We can survive, right? Maybe being misunderstood or making mistakes or feeling bad, and that our anxiety doesn't have to like protect us from those things anymore. So, again, this is a very like sort of, psychological take on the Tower card. But again, I am a therapist, so I do find that take sort of very interesting. Um, there's also the Fearless Tarot book by Elia Adams, so How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation, which I love, especially for these cards that are often depicted as scarier or oh, it's not a card you want to pull, because they really sort of combat the idea that there are bad cards and good cards. So they talk about that the Tower is all about coming back to Earth, right? If you think about the people like falling from the tower, right, they're coming back down to earth, literally, right? Maybe they were prisoners of their own making. Again, maybe they built walls around themselves that grew taller and taller, separated them from reality. Maybe the tower gained in size and made them like numb to things. Again, this sort of goes along with what Jessica Dore was saying, but being numb maybe kept them safe from being hurt by the past and in the present. And in the tower, you can like pretend, right? There's no loss. Like it, again, if you think about literally being inside of a tower that has no windows or no door, you have no idea what's going on outside, right? Maybe if you go all the way to the top, you can see out like a turret, but right, like yes, it's keeping you safe, but also you're not getting to experience the world outside. Um, so, right, if you're inside that tower, maybe you can, right, pretend that nothing's going wrong, there's no loss or change or death happening outside, right? Maybe this looks like, right, in your day to day life, you're like, oh, I'm fine, right? Like, I'm not doing as bad as other people, so, like, I shouldn't complain, right? And then often, like, the lightning striking in the card is sort of showing, like, the crisis, right? That sometimes the universe or right the consequences of our actions like send us and then it sort of sends us into this like place where it's you can't deny it anymore, right? Again, like your tower that was that safety, was that protection, is crumbling, and now what are you going to do, right? So just thinking about like, are there any unresolved hurts from the past that you need to heal or surrender? What would you rather not deal with right now, right? What are maybe some things you're avoiding or maybe using distraction to not, again, kind of deal with right now? Is there fear that if you open yourself up to feeling, right, how it actually feels, or grief or, again, that sort of surrender or healing, that maybe it'll hurt too much and it won't stop hurting, right? Again, when we've been taught or sort of denied the ability to feel our feelings, when we do start to dip our toe in the water again, it feels very scary, right? Again, if you think about, okay, like maybe to go with the metaphor, I start dipping my toe in, but like who knows how deep I'm gonna go? Who knows if the sand's gonna pull me in or the waves are gonna pull me out and it's gonna be so quick and then I'm gonna be overwhelmed, right, by the emotions and like do I have the ability to actually deal with them? Um, this talks about that the destructive and like the tower is a very, again, often visually destructive card. Like there's fire, there's lightning, there's people falling. Like it's very kind of scary looking, but it can also be like they say the most healing card in the tarot. It snaps us out of pretending that we're not hurting, right? It sort of forces us to say like, okay, like right? Maybe it's like, okay, I'm having a mental breakdown and now everyone knows. And like, okay, now I'm going to have to actually like deal with the fact that this is actually happening, right? Sometimes we just have our denial in ourselves too, and we don't share that with anyone else. Um, so that when you reflect on things, right, maybe you realize that, okay, like, what do I want to rebuild, right? Okay, the tower crumbled, like, where do I want to live next? Maybe I don't actually want to live all the way up in a tower that has no windows or doors. Maybe I want something a little more open, a little more available to other people, maybe supported by others and that kind of thing. If we're just following this metaphor down, right? And sometimes that can look like epiphanies coming to you or downloads from the universe. Sometimes it might be, right, people giving you feedback about how you are relationship that might feel really hurtful at the time, especially if it feels really true, and especially if you were sort of in denial about it at the time. So the tower tells us, right, that it's stop avoiding things and that we actually have to feel them. We can't deny our feelings another day because they're just going to kind of keep us imprisoned in that tower. We have to really be able to feel something and release it and release the hurt, because then we can like move on and move forward, right? It might take a while, it might not happen all in one session, um, but you have to actually feel it. We can't just think our way out of it or deny it or hope that if I don't acknowledge it, it'll just go away. That's not really how feelings work, and they love to just kind of pop back up when least expect it. That can make things really challenging as well. All right, so like, all right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today. And as I pull a card here, I'm going to be thinking about what kind of tower moments have come up for us lately. What's something that we need to work through or let go of, or what is needing to maybe destruct in our lives in order to grow or move into a new level or new growth pattern or kind of new habits. All right, and I'm pulling from the Sassarabita Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington, and I pulled the Ace of Pentacles reversed. So I'll read the upright first, and we'll talk about that, and then I'll sort of give my interpretation on what I think the reversal is about. So in an upright position, the Ace of Pentacles is all about prosperity, practicality, and the physical world. It represents a seed that's been planted, which will result in tangible security. This card recommends foundation building. Interesting, since we just talked about foundations crumbling, and setting the stage for good things to come in your future. Growth, prosperity, nature, and being down to earth. It's not about daydreaming or fantasy. It's a card for actually getting things done. Do something today for your future self, and they will thank you. Be it doing something good for your body, feeding your mind, investing, or building something physical. This is a good card for business and entrepreneurship. All right, so that's the upright position. So if we think about what a reversal of this might mean, and again, this is the Ace of Pentacles reversed. So it sort of warns us that maybe there's a lack of planning, maybe there's some lost opportunity. It says maybe you don't take on more than you're ready for, or expect things to come to you without work. So I would say when we're thinking about this in context of the tower, right, and what we've been talking about this episode, I would say, right, that, okay, maybe, right, you've been in denial about some things and you're ready to start looking at it. This sounds like a cautionary tale of making sure that you're not taking on too much, that maybe you're not trying to address everything at once or like totally rebuild something without actually like taking time to reflect on it, taking time to actually again sit with the feelings and feel them and process them and go through them before getting to the part kind of like the fun part or the part that looks different and right where we start building again and we start doing things and we start on that vision and we start on those dreams, right? Which can be sometimes we might want to jump to that part. I feel like this card's telling us like, okay, just like sit in it a little bit, right? Prosperity is coming. You get to build your tower back up again or whatever your building's going to be that you choose to live in or that you choose to inhabit. But right now, like, just sit in it a little bit, right? Like, okay, your tower has come down. Go go amongst the rubble, right? And go see what you can find, see what you want to keep, see what you don't, and then we can move into the rebuilding stage. It's really bringing to mind right now just things I've seen about the LA fires that happened I don't know, 2 weeks ago now, maybe, just that came through and tore so much down. People going and literally looking through the ashes, through things where their entire house is burned down and they're only able to find so many things, right? And there's so much destruction in that. And I don't want to say, like, oh, yeah, it'll be like fine. like, right. But we also see that the community came together, that people are helping take care of each other, right? We get to see like the ways that we get to support each other when terrible things happen and when people are struggling and community is impacted, right? It's a good show of like what we can do as humans and community. And that, right, like even if everything that burned down in your house and you're only able to find one thing or like the wedding ring that you left on the counter near the dishes or whatever it is, that right, like that thing you're probably going to cherish so much. And again, not to make light of the situation or say that it's easy, but right, sometimes we have to like dig through the ashes for a little bit before, right, you have to clear the rubble before you can go into the building new things stage, to the becoming a whole new you or letting go of these things, right? We have to kind of examine what has happened and kind of how we got here to this stage. All right, so links for the tarot decks that I talk about will always be in the show notes and on my website if you'd like to look at them or find where to purchase them. And thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye bye.